was approached by a defense attorney who told me he overheard some of the prisoners talking about me in the pens behind the courtroom. And apparently they were saying that I was a really tough ADA and they hoped they didn't get the guy in the wheelchair as their prosecutor.
So Ken, I don't know how to I don't know how to dive into this story. It's kind of interesting. The I dream of things that never were. The Ken Kunken story that you authored a book recently, and I wanted to talk to you about your book, which was about your story.
Great.
So can you give us a little background? You've not always been in a wheelchair. Can you tell us about a little bit about your childhood?
Sure. Well, in 1970, I was 20 years old and I had just started my junior year at Cornell University, where I was majoring in industrial engineering. And I was playing on Cornell's lightweight football team. It was a special league that we were in for, football players that were smaller than the normal heavyweight teams. It was called lightweight football. The league is now called sprint football. And I was running downfield in a game against Columbia on a kickoff. And when I tackled the ball carrier, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. And as a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed below the shoulders. I have just a little bit of movement in my left arm, but nothing in my fingers or wrist. And I basically need help in doing virtually everything.
So what was it happened on a kickoff? Your injury happened on a
Right.
kickoff?
Yeah, it happened on a kickoff, and I tackled the ball carrier and instantly became paralyzed.
Wow. Wow. I'm a big NFL fan. We go Chiefs. We are celebrating, and that's it's very interesting because the NFL recently changed the rules on the kickoff.
Right, because that's obviously the most dangerous play in a football game. So hopefully the change in the rules will result in a lot less injuries.
I certainly hope so. So that happened when you were 20.
Right, back in 1970.
Wow. So you've spent a long time in a wheelchair, and
More than 54 years.
wow. So can you give us a little bit of insight on what happened in your life prior to that? Where'd you grow up at?
Okay, well, I grew up in Long Island, and just to tell you a little bit about my early life, my mother died when I was less than 1 month old. It was in 1950 during the polio epidemic, and both my brother and mother caught polio. My brother's, fortunately, was a mild case, and he totally recovered and later became a very good athlete. But unfortunately, my mother's condition got worse, and she died from polio when I was less than 1 month old.
Wow. So you've had some trials and tribulations almost your entire life, huh?
Yeah, sure did. And my father remarried when I was still 4 years old, but unfortunately, it was not a very happy marriage, and it resulted in them getting divorced. So, I lived with his second wife for about 9 years in a very unhappy relationship. And then back in 1968, my father married for the third time. So it was certainly a bit of an unconventional household because my father's second wife had two children from her previous marriage. So as a result, I also had a stepbrother and a stepsister. And when they were married, they gave birth to my younger sister, who's 10 years younger than me. So I have an older brother and a younger sister. And then I had a stepbrother and a stepsister.
So were you a good student in school?
Yeah, I actually did pretty well in school. So, in fact, my grades were good enough to enable me to be admitted to Cornell University, to their College of Engineering. So, one of the top schools in the country.
Wow. That's awesome. So going back to 1970 and the accident which left you paralyzed, your injury. Right after that, when you wake up and you got people around you, what's going on in your mind at that time?
Okay, well, first of all, when you say when I woke up, I never lost consciousness. I was conscious the whole time, and I really didn't know what was happening, why I couldn't move. I had never really heard of a spinal cord injury before my injury. So I was pretty much in the dark. And, when I later learned that I broke my neck, I thought that's the reason why I was paralyzed. And when my broken neck would be repaired, that I would regain my movement. So it was very strange. So I was conscious while I was on the football field. And in fact, not only did I lose all movement, I lost all sensation pretty much below my shoulders. So when they put me on a stretcher and was carrying me off the field, it felt like they were just lifting my head up off the ground and leaving my body behind. It was as if I felt as if I had been decapitated. Um, but I ended up going obviously to the hospital, and I spent the next 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers.
Wow, what was recovery like? I know obviously you didn't recover too much. um,
No, I got very little recovery. I have just a little bit of movement in my left arm and, nothing in my right. And, while I was in the hospital, I was very disappointed that the medical professionals were treating me not only as if I had a physical injury, but as if I had an intellectual disability as well. I mean, I injured my neck and not my head, but, they started treating me as if I was totally disabled. And they didn't seem to want to answer any of my questions. And when I was able to get a hold of a pamphlet that the Institute had put out with somebody turning the pages for me, it seemed that the best the medical personnel thought someone with my type of spinal cord injury would ever be able to do would be to sell magazine subscriptions over the telephone. And I was devastated when I saw that. I was convinced there was still a lot more I could do. And by the way, back then, I couldn't even dial a telephone. They were rotary phones, not even push button phones.
I remember those actually. What a pain in the ass those were.
Mm.
So man, that's wild. I can just imagine how that must made you feel. Like, guys, I'm right here. I'm not stupid. I understand. And for people to treat you like that, it's almost like, I'm sure you've run into the situation where people are talking to you, but they're not really talking to you. They're talking at you because of your disability.
Absolutely. And it was so strange because, as I say, here I was studying engineering at one of the most prestigious schools in the country. I injure my neck and not my head, and suddenly I'm treated like I don't have a brain in my body.
That's crazy. That's wow. So you had mentioned, did you graduate?
Yeah, what I did was 11 days after I finally got out of the hospital, I returned to Cornell University and I completed my junior and senior year during those next 2 years. And in 1973, I became the first quadriplegic to ever graduate from Cornell.
Well, that's wild. So when that happened, they were like, "Good job." Did they talk to you like that?
I think they were really shocked and surprised. And, I actually got a lot of publicity when I graduated. And I don't think anybody was even more surprised than my own doctors, nurses, and therapists at what I was able to do. So, I hope that that led them to encourage more people with disabilities to go on and get, secondary and further education. Then they didn't seem to be encouraging that when I was in the hospital for people to be returning to school and, do more with their lives. And I was very upset when I saw my fellow patients, who many had been hurt far longer than I was, didn't seem to be doing much with their lives. And I think that was because people had such limited expectations for what somebody with a disability could do. And it's so important to keep their expectations higher than they were.
I absolutely agree. For me, sometimes there's a fine line between humility, humor, and disrespect. And I sometimes I don't know where to find that. Sometimes I don't know where that line is. And so when having conversations with people that are disabled or not like me, sometimes I try to balance a conversation with humility and humor and curiosity. I'm very curious. I'm a very curious person. And a lot of times, instead of dancing around questions and trying to be respectful, sometimes it's just more respectful to just come out and ask that question.
Absolutely. And I found actually the little kids were the best at that. They had no compunction about asking me about my disability and why I'm in a wheelchair. And that was fine with me. I preferred it that way and to be asked those questions.
So, when did you graduate? Were you an engineer?
Yeah, I graduated with a degree where I was majoring in industrial engineering. But following my graduation, I really felt that industrial engineering was not a very viable field for me. I mean, this was well before they had laptop computers. So, things were very different back then. In fact, it was 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. So it was very difficult to get around in public. I was not able to use my electric wheelchair outdoors at Cornell because the campus was on a very hilly terrain, and almost every one of its buildings had steps in front of it, and there was no ramps or curb cuts back then. So I decided, based on the recommendation of a psychology professor, that I was taking his psychology course. He suggested I pursue a career in psychology and counseling. So I did that and I stayed on at Cornell and I earned a Master of Arts degree where I majored in counseling and student personnel administration. And I became the first quadriplegic to ever earn a graduate degree from Cornell. And then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University where I earned a second master's degree. This one was in psychological counseling and rehabilitation. And I decided to look for a job in the rehabilitation counseling field. And now that I had 3 degrees from Ivy League schools, two from Cornell, one from Columbia, two master's degrees, I felt I shouldn't have too much difficulty securing employment. Well, as it turned out, no one wanted to hire me. This was in the mid 70s, and it seemed everyone felt I was just too disabled to work. And back then, I was even turned down when I offered to volunteer my services. And I sent out more than 200 resumes and looked for a job for a year before I finally found one organization willing to give me the opportunity to show what I could do. And that's an organization on Long Island called Abilities Incorporated, which is part of what's now called the Viscardi Center. It's named after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And they hired me to work as a vocational rehabilitation counselor for other individuals who had severe physical disabilities.
That's wild. Very, very impressive for someone that isn't disabled, let alone someone who doesn't have the ability to leave your chair. That's pretty inspiring. So for you, looking at the doctors, was it more of like a, what else am I supposed to do? What the hell else am I supposed to do here other than continue what I'm doing? Um, was it like that for you?
Pretty much. I mean, they really didn't seem to want to answer any of my questions. And I was fortunate that I had a vocational counselor there at the center that encouraged me to return to school. And, she even indicated that I'm not an invalid. I still have a lot of value. There's still a lot of things I could do despite my disability, and that I needed to make the most of my abilities. So I might add that, I worked for a little over 2 years as vocational rehabilitation counselor. And Um, I really enjoyed the work I was doing. And as it turned out at the center, I think I probably was more seriously physically disabled than any of the people I was counseling. So, I had the opportunity to encourage others to do more with their lives and to go out and hopefully get a job. And, I was also a placement counselor there. And I enjoyed the work very much. But I might add that, as my duties increased, I also spoke at a lot of conferences before groups and organizations concerning non-discrimination and affirmative action for people with disabilities. And often after my talks, I would be asked questions. And while I do my best to answer those questions, I was always very careful to caution the questioners they should really consult with a lawyer about their concerns. And I guess it didn't take long before I started to think, there's no reason why I couldn't become that lawyer. So I ended up leaving the center and I went to Hofstra University's law school.
Hell yes. That's that's awesome. That's very important actually here in my house. I My son is he's autistic and he is the light of my life. He's 5 and he's amazing. I've got two other boys and a girl, and my two older boys have ADHD, and they're somewhat limited in some of the things that they can do with their diagnoses. Now, I'm a very, very big proponent for occupational therapy and vocational rehab for those reasons, because, sometimes we do need a little extra help in teaching our children how to live in a world that wasn't built for them. And did you have any struggles finding resources to help you in aiding your pursuit in your degrees?
Oh, I sure did. I mean, once again, I indicated I was injured about 20 years before the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect. At Cornell, I indicated there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. So on my first day of classes, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. So I was so concerned about going up and down the steps, it was difficult for me to pay any attention to the lecturers at all. So, when you talk about some of the difficulties, they didn't have laptop computers back then. It was difficult to find resources that were out there for somebody in my condition. You didn't see somebody in my condition out in public or in colleges or universities at that time, or at least I didn't. I didn't know of anybody else that was in a similar condition that was doing some of the things that I was doing. And in terms of what the resources were, again, they didn't have Google back then or some of these other sites that you could go to find out. And I think the counselors that they had then didn't have much experience in counseling somebody with my physical limitations that wanted to do something productive with their lives and felt, I could do something still. I knew I couldn't work at an entry level factory position because I didn't have the physical ability to do that. So I needed to find some type of job that I could do with my disability. And I was very fortunate when I got the opportunity to work as a rehab counselor. And I might add that in doing so, that increased my feelings of self-worth, my self-esteem, my self-confidence. In fact, so much so that I left to go to law school.
That's awesome. So, reading part of your biography here, it said you became an assistant district attorney.
Yeah, I have an older brother who at the time was working as a defense attorney. And he suggested that I do an internship while I was in law school at the district attorney's office. So I did that after my second summer of law school, and I loved it. I loved the experience, and I found a new way that I could help others and serve the community as a whole by working as an assistant district attorney. So I applied for a full-time position during my third year of law school. And I was very fortunate that the district attorney at the time, a person by the name of Dennis Dillon, was a very progressive, self-confident, forward-thinking district attorney who based his hiring decision on my abilities rather than my disability. And he hired me to work as an assistant district attorney. And for that opportunity, I'll always be grateful for that. And I know there were people that questioned hiring me because not many people had ever heard of somebody that's a quadriplegic being a trial attorney, let alone an assistant district attorney. And I know somebody in the office, I even heard later, questioned how they could have hired me because, as he put it, I can't even write. Well, district attorney hired me, and I worked as an assistant district attorney just to jump ahead for close to 40 years. I retired last year.
Wow, that's awesome. So so what year did you start with them?
All right, I started in 1982. And just to tell you a little bit about my history in the DA's office, um, first I completed obviously 3 years of law school during the standard 3 year time period. I passed a very difficult New York State bar exam the first time that I took it. And I began my work by participating in a very intensive 4 week training program where they taught us all aspects of trial techniques from a prosecutor's perspective. And I very proudly went to court my first day, and I couldn't fit through the swinging doorways in the courtroom to get to the prosecutor's table. They were too narrow to allow me to pass through in my electric wheelchair. That's how I began my work. My first assignment was to our traffic court bureau, which was on the second floor of a neighboring building. And I was promoted after just 3 days in traffic court because the elevator was broken and no one knew when that would be fixed. So that's how I got my first promotion. But once I was promoted to our district court bureau, I did a lot of litigation. And in fact, not long after I started doing trials in district court, I was approached by a defense attorney who told me he overheard some of the prisoners talking about me in the pens behind the courtroom. And apparently they were saying that I was a really tough ADA and they hoped they didn't get the guy in the wheelchair as their prosecutor. So I was later promoted to our county court trial bureau, where I was now handling felonies. And each year, the number of trials, pretrial hearings, and grand jury presentations that I did each year were consistently among the highest in my bureau. And I was promoted a number of times where I eventually became one of our deputy bureau chiefs, where I was helping supervise more than 25 other assistant district attorneys.
Wow. Wow. So you started that in 1982 and still, laptops not a thing. Compute personal computers were barely a thing, I think, in 82.
Right.
So as your career progressed and you had access to technology, was it more difficult to use or learn how to use technology to aid in your career?
It was really difficult because, I would have trouble even accessing the computer. One, back then, you used to have to key punch on cards, and I couldn't even fit close enough to the key punch machine, let alone, punch the cards. So it was very difficult for me to access that. So I relied a lot on my memory, and I did a lot to train my memory, to get to the point where I could go into court and deliver an hour summation without any notes in front of me. So it was certainly very challenging, but I was able to manage. And I might add that when I finally did retire from the office, they actually honored me by naming an award after me. They now give the Kenneth Kunken Award annually to an outstanding assistant district attorney each year who they believe possesses the same work ethic that I showed when I was working in the office.
Wow. That's that's incredible. That's amazing. So uh you had mentioned you'd retired last year. When you retired, what kind of technology did you have to to help you get through your day?
Well, now I have a laptop computer and I have a wheelchair that actually has a Bluetooth device by the joystick, and I could actually hit the joystick a little bit with my left arm. I have no movement in my fingers or my wrist, but with my, arm, I could kind of hit the joystick a bit. And as a result, I could work the Bluetooth device. And by working the Bluetooth on my laptop computer, I can actually now navigate my way on the computer and, scroll down different sites by myself. So that's been a big help.
That's awesome. So what did you have an aide in
Yeah,
82?
well, I had an aide for many, many years, certainly when I went back to Cornell, and for many years after it. But just to tell you a little bit about my personal life, um, I tried to do as much with my personal life as I could. And, I really didn't want to be limited in anything that I did after my injury. I tried to pick up my life and do as much with my life as I could, as if I had never been, the result of my injury and a quadriplegic. And part of that included dating. And, as you might expect, dating when you're quadriplegic and trying to impress a woman when you're almost totally paralyzed poses its own unique set of challenges. So it took me a while, but eventually I found the woman of my dreams. And in 2003, we got married. Her name is Anna. She's actually sitting just off to my right now. And in 2003, Anna and I were married. And at that time, she had actually originally been my aide. She used to help me on weekends. And the more time we spent together, the more our relationship grew until it finally became a romantic relationship. And I've been really fortunate that it progressed to the point where we got married. But let me continue since for purposes of this podcast, I want your viewers to know that when Anna and I got married, Anna said that she wanted to have my baby, and not just a baby, my baby. Now, this seemed impossible. At the time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. Well, there's an expression in the military that I've always liked. It's the difficult we do at once, the impossible takes a little longer. Well, Anna and I were determined to make the impossible happen, and we looked into various resources, including in vitro fertilization. And we're very excited to learn that it still may be possible for someone in my condition to father a child. So we pursued it, and through in vitro fertilization and some advancements in science and research, Anna became pregnant. And on January 24th, 2005, just 20 years ago, baby, this week, I was actually present in the delivery room. Really, I was present in the delivery room. Picture this when my wife Anna gave birth to triplets. We
Woo!
have three incredible sons, Joseph, James, and Timothy. All three are now sophomores at three different colleges in upstate New York.
Wow. That's so tell me, Ken, which is more difficult? Getting four college degrees or being a dad?
I tell you, they've both been challenging, but raising triplets, we're not just talking about being a dad, we're talking raising triplets. It's the most incredible, wonderful, wonderful challenge I've ever had to face, and I enjoyed every minute of it.
I tell everybody all the time that's when they ask, I like so I've been a stay-at-home dad for almost 10 years now, or a little over 10 years now. Uh, and people ask all the time, they were like, how do you do that? What's that like? Do you like it? And I'm like, most days is challenging, but it's the best job in the world, man. It is
Absolutely.
hands down, being a dad, being a parent is is the best thing that you could ever do in life, in my opinion.
I agree with you. I agree. It's totally changed my life and my outlook on life. I mean, I just love seeing the world through my children's eyes. And it has just done so much to raise my spirits. And, unfortunately, during the COVID epidemic, when there were so many terrible things going on in the world with this disease, as a result, for a while, my boys weren't going to school. Schools were closed down and they were, progressing with school through, work on the computer and Zoom. And so I guess I felt like a stay-at-home dad for part of that time. And it was just great, just spending even more time with my children during that time. And boy, I miss them terribly now that they're all away at college. But they're doing great, and I am so proud of them.
Where are they in school at?
Well, one is at State University of New York at Morrisville, where he's studying renewable energy. One is at Syracuse University, where he's pursuing a dual major, one in the Maxwell School of Public Affairs and in the Newhouse School of Communications. And he wants to be a journalist. And my third son, Joseph, 50 years after I graduated from Cornell, he enrolled as a freshman there. And he's now in his sophomore year studying mechanical engineering.
Hell yes. That's amazing, man. So, inquiring minds want to know about how this IVF works, and that with your disability, how did they extract everything they needed?
Well, that was a real challenge. And again, keep in mind, this was over 20 years ago now that I was going through my procedures. But originally, they tried electroejaculation. And while it had some success, it was not able to get motile sperm in doing it. So I went through three procedures like that, all that were unfortunately unsuccessful. Um, but then they decided to try a fourth procedure where they actually did surgery on my scrotum and they removed some viable sperm. And lo and behold, I have triplet sons. You know,
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, being paralyzed, that didn't hurt, did it?
I didn't think it would. So I underwent the surgery without anesthesia. As it turned out, even though I don't have actual sensation there, it started an enormous amount of muscle spasms where my body was jerking around a lot, and it turned out to be incredibly painful. So I was not expecting that. I mean, obviously, I would have done anything I needed to do to, become a father, but that procedure in itself turned out to be pretty painful, even though I have no sensation below my shoulders.
That's so. I mean, that had to be a funny sensation to say the least.
Well, didn't seem very funny at the
Well,
time.
yeah.
But I know, but I mean, I still get a lot of muscle spasms where my arms and legs jerk, even though I can't control it. And boy, that day when they were, removing the sperm, I felt like I was going to bounce off the table. I mean, my body was really jerking a lot.
That's 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 wild. So, three boys, three boys. I've got three boys myself, but not all at the same time. That had to test your patience on some days.
It sure did, but you know what? They're best friends. They've always had a playmate, even during the days of COVID when you had to stay home. They had their brothers with them, and they've grown up to be very close. They visit each other in college. Their colleges are all in upstate New York. They've gone to classes with each other. They've done everything their whole life with each other, and it's just great to see. I mean, I believe in the importance of family and staying close. I've always been very close with my family, and I just love the fact that my three sons are very close. And when they were small, it was quite a challenge, for me to try and stay involved with their lives because, obviously I couldn't change their diaper or do a lot of things with them. But I found that, there were limited things I could still do. I mean, I could have all three sitting on my lap at one time and take them out for a walk in my electric wheelchair and, explain things that we were seeing, like that's an airplane. And, that's a sewer, and here's a car, and and I'd get to teach them that way and bond with them. There are times when I'd go with my wife to church, and the boys would sit on my lap, and it was just great spending time with them. And then just to tell you a little bit more, they grew up knowing that they needed to help dad as well. And there are times when the boys would feed me, even when they were really small. I'd get a lot of dizzy a lot because I had problems with blood pressure. They'd lift up my legs to help keep my blood pressure up, or give me, pills to increase my blood pressure, or, turn on the light, or give me the newspaper, or, they were my best helpers. And they'd go out somewhere together and they'd come back and say, Dad, you could go there. We saw there's a ramp. They would notice these things. So, they've just been great and are so comfortable around somebody with a disability that we've done our best to expose them to other people with disabilities. Where I worked as a rehab counselor, I'm now on their board of directors at the Viscardi Center. So we've taken them there, and they're very comfortable being around people with disabilities. And they're comfortable knowing that they have the responsibility of helping others. And they do that, and they're great with that.
Yeah, I think we all should be we should all strive to be that way. We should all strive to be just good people in general, and not be a pain in the ass all the time. And what I mean by pain in the ass is when you look at someone with disabilities, you just have to understand that they are people too, and that's where the conversation always starts in our house is with my son with autism. He's not he's not really all that different from any of the rest of us. I mean, and that's where the conversation always starts. Is I'm like, hey, he's a person too. Ask him. When I'm asked, hey, his name's Rocket. Um, does Rocket want this? And I'm like, I don't know. Ask him. You know, it's he's that sense of autonomy. Is has got to be there, and that's one of the things that I got from being around people with disabilities and my curiosity when I've talked to people like yourself and they're saying, hey, if you got questions, just ask because it's more
Absolutely.
offensive to us when you
Right.
don't ask.
Absolutely. And I've been interviewed a number of times by different reporters, and there are times when they've interviewed my kids, and they would ask them, how did it feel growing up with a dad who's in a wheelchair? And their response was, he's just my dad. I mean, that's my dad. I don't look at him as any different than anybody else. So they're very natural and comfortable with it and don't think there's anything unique or special about having a dad in a wheelchair. Um, so I think the biggest exception for them is I'm so much older than the other dads they grew up with because I was in my 50s when they were born. But, in addition to them being triplets, which make them kind of unique in itself, and having a father in a wheelchair, I think what surprised a lot of people, at least to them, is their dad was so much older than the other dads. In fact, when we'd go out together, people would often come up to us and come up to me and say, "Oh, you must be such a proud grandpa." You know,
That's happened to me
well,
recently.
oh well.
Yeah, that's I was at the grocery store with
Mm-mm.
with my youngest, and the cashier had asked him if he was out with grandpa,
Mm-mm.
and I was like, no, I'm dad. But that's I don't really mind. I think of him sort of like he's treated sort of like a grandkid. It's all our other children are older. There's 10 years difference between him and my middle kid. So it's it is different. It feels a little different. I'm a little wiser. I'm a little bit more patient and understanding. And I don't. I'm still learning that patience is a virtue. But fortunately, my kids are understanding of my situation as well because over the years, I've come to understand that uh, they ask questions because they don't know, and I have to answer them whether I like to or not, and I have to be as honest as possible. So in that, I learned being honest about how I'm feeling, or if I'm frustrated, or if I'm out of patience, being honest about that with them in the moment really, really helps. Like, hey guys, I'm having a difficult day. Leave me the hell alone. And that usually works, but there's sometimes where it doesn't. Um, when when you said this was '03.
I got married in '03.
Oh,
My
you got
kids
married
were
in '03.
born in '05. So last week they turned 20 years old.
Wow.
Um, so, I retired just last year from full time. I had retired from full-time work in 2016, but worked part-time for the last 8 years and totally retired last year. So it gave me more time when my boys were home and not away at school to spend with them. And it's just great. And nothing like it. It's spending time with your kids.
Yes, I absolutely agree. What was the what is the biggest challenge that you had, um uh, obviously outside of the physical limitations with being a father?
Well, trying to do things with my children, obviously with three kids, there'd be times when one of them would be crying or somebody would get hurt doing something, and there was very limited help I could give them. So, I learned early on that my role had to be mostly as a provider, making sure they had enough resources, money to make sure, we were able to support ourselves and do everything that we could to give the boys what they needed. But I was fortunately, my wife, who was phenomenal, provided all the physical care that they needed while helping me as well. And, it made us all closer as a family. The boys know that part of mommy's duties is to help dad. Right? And they needed to learn teamwork to help each other and to help me and mommy as well, and making sure the house ran smoothly.
So what do you think, what do you think would be one thing that helped being a father and also having your disability?
Well, it gave me a certain degree of understanding of what patience is all about. I've needed to learn to exercise a lot of patience since I need help in doing virtually everything, and a lot of that time I need to wait to get the help that I need. So I've learned over the years the importance of patience, and certainly dealing with three kids who all have their own needs and all have their own wants, sometimes all at the same time. I needed to learn to show them the proper patience and give each one the proper attention when they need it, and to do my best to give them, make sure they grew up with the values and character that I thought was important for a child. And I know when I was injured at the age of 20, my poor father was obviously devastated by my injury. And he unfortunately was not able to provide the physical care I needed, but he made sure that we had the proper resources available. He was the provider to make sure, we were well taken care of. And I learned, I guess, through him as well, the importance of being that provider. And fortunately, as a lawyer, I was able to do that.
Hell yeah. There's many, many different things that men can do to be providers for their families. And that's a testament to that right there is hey, you couldn't physically do a lot of the things that you wanted to do, but you could be a good provider, and that you were. And that's quite an amazing journey that you've had over the years
Thank
in
you. But I have to emphasize that to me, one of the most important things too was to give them the proper values and character growing
man.
up. Just be three really good individuals, not just to each other, but to everybody around them. And they are so well liked and respected by everybody in the community and at their school. It is so wonderful to see how they've developed.
And you had mentioned just a second ago that the three of them, they you had to understand that the three of them needed their each, individual attention, and they all three had each individual needs. And that's an important thing to remember. As a dad, when people ask me, "Hey, do you have a favorite?" And I'm like, "No, no, I don't have a favorite." But you ask the kids, they all know, and it's one of those things I have to explain. Like, there is no favorites here. Like, I'm a dad to four kids, and the thing is, they're all different. It's not that I love one more than the other. It's a different love that I have to provide for each child. So this child may not need as much love, care, and attention as this child over here. And this child over here, he needs um, not attention, but he needs more love than the rest. And so that's very important that you highlighted that. I have to remind people of that all the time. I don't have favorites. I have different children.
Right. And, that's so important. And I might add that while, my kids are triplets, they're three very, very different people with different wants, different desires, different aptitudes. And I love seeing that. It's just great. And it's easy for me with them growing up. I mean, they're fraternal triplets, so they don't look exactly alike, although they do look similar. So, it was easy for me to know I need to treat each one differently and separately, but love them all as much as I can, in the same way, and make sure that they grew up knowing the importance of family and loving each other, and showing the proper respect for people. And that includes not just mom, dad, but aunts, uncles, grandparents, cousins, everybody involved in our family. And they've done that. And it's great.
Yeah, we've talked about on the podcast over the last few weeks. It's kind of a reoccurring thing that pops up. The golden rule, treat others how you want to be treated yourself. I think that's very important to teach children, especially young children, and kind of imprint that on them from an early age. Hey, you don't like that, let's not do that to other people. And I think that's very important too.
I agree.
So, Ken, do you any of your boys play sports?
That's interesting. Certainly, they don't play football, and none of them want to even watch it when it's on television. But I knew it was important that they grow up to be physically active and in good physical condition. So they've actually, all three have pursued the martial arts. All three of them are second degree black belts in the martial art Taekwondo, where they've also worked as instructors. They've been instructors in martial arts. And they all
Wow.
have studied Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well. And they love it. They're in terrific shape. And the kids that they've instructed look at them with such respect. And my boys are so good at dealing with younger kids and serving as instructors and as role models for others as to how to conduct yourself. Just great to see.
That's awesome. So what are your thoughts on football?
I watch it every Sunday. I'm a big New York Jets fan. I'll be rooting for Kansas City, though, in the Super Bowl, as I have in the past. Um, it's a very exciting sport. It unfortunately has too many injuries, and I recognize that. And while I absolutely loved playing it, and I still love watching it, uh, I'm glad that my boys have never decided to play it and that they've chosen other ways of keeping in condition. But I'm
Yeah.
an avid sports fan, and I still watch it every chance I get. In fact, when I was undergoing my, hospital stay and rehabilitation, when I was finally moved out of the intensive care unit where I was in for quite a while and moved up to a private room where I actually had a television, The first thing I watched on television was a football game, much to my family's dismay. Um, that was the first thing that I watched. And in fact, there's actually, a film of my injury because, they filmed every game. And that was one of the first things I also watched after watching other people playing ball again. I watched my injury being replayed, um, which was not an easy thing to do, but I thought it was important that I see exactly what happened. But football, I watch it every week. I read about it. I talk about it. It's a part of my life.
That's awesome. So did you say you were a Giants fan or a Jets fan?
Well, I'm a fan of both of them, but more so a Jets fan.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about Aaron Rodgers. How do you feel about Aaron Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers, well, obviously he's a little past his prime, but I think he's still terrific. And I'm a big advocate of getting a very strong line in front of him to give him the proper protection so that, he still has the ability to throw a good pass, and control the offense. And he's going to be in the Hall of Fame. He was a great player and still has a lot to offer.
I love Aaron Rodgers, and so you guys just picked up Devonte Adams as well. And when you made that pickup, there was a big difference in the offense after that. Devonte Adams was an immediate difference maker there.
Right. And of course, we have Garrett Wilson, too, as a terrific receiver. And Brees Hall is a terrific running back. I mean, the pieces are there to make it into a great team. I thought it was going to happen this past year. I'm convinced it'll happen next year. Although I might add, I say that every year. I'm a fan, but it's exciting to think about.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Ken, I think that's a great place to leave this conversation for now. Is there anything you'd like the audience to know about your book?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yeah, it took a while for me to complete my book, which is called I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story. And if I might tell you how I came up with that title, while I was still in the rehab center, now this is back in 1971, I was asked to testify before a United States Health Subcommittee chaired by Senator Edward Kennedy. And 8 days after my testimony, Senator Kennedy sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the words on that inscription have always been very meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that's where I got the title of my book, I Dream of Things That Never Were. And I actually started writing my book while I was still a patient in the rehab facility. A friend of my aunt's came to the hospital, thought it may be a good way of me dealing with the depression I was going through at that time, and to be informative, to tell people what it was like for my kind of injury, what that was like, and going through rehab. And for a while, I worked with this man about writing the book, and we'd start and stop. Then I went away to college and would come back and we'd do a little more. And then we'd stop and we'd put it down for years. And then I'd started to do it again. And then after I was married and we had the triplets, while they were attending like school on the weekend, they used to go to a Polish school on weekend because my wife's originally from Poland. My wife and I would find a quiet place where we could work on the book again. And it took quite a while, but we decided it would be important to finish one for my boys to read, but also because I've been told what I've done with my life is helped inspire and motivate others to do more with their lives. And I thought by finishing my book, more people would be exposed to it, and hopefully it would help more people. And in fact, this week we actually came out with an audiobook for my book as well. So now it's out in hardcover, Kindle, and audiobook. And they could learn more about me and my book by going to my website, kenkunken.com. And if they click how to order the book, it'll tell them how to order the audiobook as well as the Kindle and the hardcover.
That's awesome. That's a whole nother conversation there. What year did your wife move from Poland?
She came here at the end of 1998 and, started working with me in 1999 as my weekend aide. And as I say, we got married 2003, had our triplets in 2005. We've been married now more than 21 years, and we make a good team together. So, writing
That's
the book,
awesome.
we did it together where we were sitting next to each other, and she would type it up as I was dictating, and she would constantly ask questions and tell me more about this and more about that. And it was interesting because, the more we're talking, she'd be saying, I never knew that. You never told me that. And it was another way of getting to know each other even better during that time. And so we collaborated and did it together.
So are you a history fan?
I used to be. When I say I used to be, growing up, that was one of my favorite courses and classes. And I used to read a lot about American history, a little bit about world history, but mostly American history.
Yeah, I that so what I wanted to ask real quick because I mean, like I said, that's a whole nother conversation in there. But are you interested in geopolitics at all? Is that something you read up on or?
Well, I used to, but these days I find it more depressing to be watching the news and hearing what has taken place. And I'm trying to keep a happy balance between the two. But I might add that, I used to listen to a lot of history books on audiobooks. That was an easy way for me to continue doing reading because it's difficult for me to turn pages. And, I've tried to keep up with, history and the latest books that I find interesting that would keep my interest by audiobooks. But in terms of politics these days, I have to try and keep it in moderation, you know,
I
when
can
I
respect that.
turn on the
I can
news.
respect that.
Mm.
So that's KenKunken.com. I dream of things that never were, the Ken Kunken story. And I'm looking at your website right here and they're right front and center is how to purchase the book. So um that's you've got an incredible story and we've just only scratched the surface here. We've this has been a great conversation, Ken, and I really appreciate you coming and hanging out with me and taking this time to discuss your life and the incredible story that has been your life over the last 50 years since your accident. That's crazy that you've accomplished so much and in just in between 1970 and 1982, and let alone from 82 forward, and then three boys. Wow.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your podcast and to share my story. But secondly, I want to make it very clear I had a lot of help every step of the way, and I still get a lot of help, mostly obviously from my wife and kids these days. But I couldn't have done any of the things I did without a lot of help, and I'm so grateful for that. And of course, fortunately, a good deal of that help came from my very supportive family, who basically assured me they would act as my arms and legs if need be to make sure I could still do everything I wanted to do. And thanks to them and help from friends and others, I was able to do the things that I've done.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. Like I said, this conversation here, I've been looking forward to this one for a month now, and I just for whatever reason, I knew that this was going to be a great conversation. This was going to be a great interview, and I appreciate you being a good sport about everything. And man, like I said, you continue to inspire, Ken, and that I can't thank you enough for. And
Thank you.
without mincing words any longer, I guess we'll just let this go out on a high note, and we'll have to get together again, Ken, and we'll talk about other things, and we'll talk about in more in-depth things and parenting and we'll just have to do it again sometime, man.
Great. That would be my pleasure. Thank you.
You're welcome. We'll see you later. Bye.
Bye.